The Tim Hortons on the corner of King and Bay smelled the same every morning. Dark roast, recycled air, and the particular exhaustion of people who'd given up sleeping for ambition. I'd been coming here for exactly 412 mornings, always at 6:50. Always ordering the same medium dark roast with 1 cream, always sitting at the same window seat for 11 minutes before walking 3 blocks north to the Hargrove Capitol building. I wasn't counting the days out of sentimentality. I was counting them because Edmund Hargrove paid me to notice things, and noticing my own patterns was just practice. My name is Audrey, and I'd spent the last year and 7 months as executive assistant to one of Bay Street's most feared private equity fund managers. Before that, I'd been a paralegal, then a junior analyst at a firm that folded 6 months after I joined. Before that, I'd been 24 and quietly terrified that I'd never find work that suited my particular skill set, which was somewhere between obsessive organizational precision and an unsettling ability to predict what people needed before they knew they needed it. Edmund Hargrove had hired me in 45 minutes flat, cutting short an interview that was scheduled for an hour because, he said, he'd already decided in the first 15. He'd asked me 3 questions: how I'd handled a crisis, what I noticed about his office that was wrong, and what I wanted in 5 years. I'd told him about covering for a senior partner during a medical emergency without alerting clients. I'd pointed out that his assistant had been routing his Thursday calls through the wrong extension for what looked like 6 weeks, based on the message backlog, and I'd told him I wanted to be the kind of professional people couldn't operate without, not because I had no ambition of my own, but because I'd learned that indispensability was its own form of power. He'd looked at me for a moment with those pale winter-gray eyes that gave nothing away and said, "You start Monday." That had been 503 days ago, give or take. I stopped counting at 412 because that was the morning everything shifted. It started, as so many things do, with something beautiful appearing where it had no business being. I came back from my Tim's run to find a courier package on my desk. That wasn't unusual. I signed for deliveries all the time. What was unusual was that it was addressed to me. Not to Hargrove Capital, not care of Edmund Hargrove, not to my title, just my name, Audrey Sinclair. And inside, nested in tissue paper that probably cost more per square foot than my apartment's carpet, was a single amaryllis bloom. Deep burgundy, perfect petals, stem cut at a precise angle, no card. I stared at it for a long moment. I placed it in the water glass I kept at my desk. Because what else do you do with something beautiful that arrives without explanation? And went back to reconciling Edmund's schedule for the following week. He summoned me at 9:15, not through the intercom. He appeared in the doorway of his office, which he almost never did, and stood there with his hands in the pockets of his charcoal suit jacket and his gaze fixed on my desk. "What is that?" "A flower. Amaryllis. It arrived this morning. I can see what it is." His voice was measured, the way it always was when he was containing something. I meant who sent it. There was no card. He looked at me then, with an expression I couldn't name. Edmund Hargrove had approximately 4 public facial expressions: focused, displeased, politely neutral, and the very rare and brief, almost smile he produced when a deal closed above projection. What he was doing now wasn't any of them. "Have reception log all courier deliveries addressed to staff directly," he said. "Effective immediately." Then he went back into his office and closed the door. I called reception. They had no record because the courier had come directly to the floor, which meant someone had building access, or knew someone who did. The flower sat on my desk like a question I didn't know how to ask. My friend Camille texted me at lunch, when I was eating a sandwich at my desk, because Edmund had a 1:30 that required me on standby. She worked in compliance 2 floors up, and had the excellent quality of noticing everything without making you feel surveilled. "Is it true someone sent you something?" "Where did you hear that?" The woman at the main desk mentioned it. Apparently people are talking. One amaryllis. Very mysterious. Very dramatic. Very not normal office behavior. I told her I had no idea who'd sent it. "Do you think it might be from a certain someone on the 32nd floor?" By which she meant Edmund. I'd had this conversation with Camille approximately once a month since I'd started, and every time I explained the same thing. We had a professional relationship. Edmund Hargrove was my employer, and people who speculated about the personal lives of executives based on nothing were creating a narrative that had no basis in reality. "He notices things about you," she'd said once. "He notices things about everything. That's what makes him exceptional at his job. He had your preferred lunch order added to the Thursday catering run. He likes operational efficiency. Audrey, Camille." And that was usually where it ended. I put my phone face down and focused on the 1:30 prep. The afternoon passed the way afternoons in that office always did, with a low hum of controlled urgency. Edmund's 1:30 ran long, which meant his 3 had to be pushed, which meant his 3 called me directly to express his displeasure, which meant I had to be very professional about the fact that I agreed with them, but couldn't say so. I rescheduled, smoothed things over, sent a follow-up that framed the delay as considerate rather than disruptive. By the time 5:30 rolled around, I'd forgotten about the flower entirely. Then Edmund appeared at my desk again. The flower. I looked up. He was standing with his jacket back on, his briefcase in hand, which meant he was leaving, unusual for before 7. And he was looking at the amaryllis with an expression I could only describe as controlled hostility directed at a plant. "Should it not be here?" I asked. "I'd prefer it wasn't." He met my eyes. "Do you know who might have sent it?" "I've been thinking about that all day. I genuinely have no idea." Something moved across his face. "Fine, I'm having the courier logs pulled. If it happens again, I want to know immediately." He paused, his fingers tightening slightly on the briefcase handle. "Good work today with the Keller rescheduling. They were difficult." Edmund Hargrove did not give unsolicited compliments. In almost 2 years, he'd told me twice that I'd handled something well. This was the 3rd time. I thanked him. He left. I sat there for a moment with a dead amaryllis, and more questions than I'd started the day with. The second flower arrived on a Wednesday. A white peony this time, same tissue paper, same lack of card, and this time I brought it straight to Edmund before placing it anywhere. He held the stem and looked at it with the careful attention he usually reserved for term sheets. "Who signed for it?" "The same courier service as before. Prepaid cash account, no name attached." He set the flower on my desk with a precision that somehow managed to communicate several things at once. "You don't recognize this as anything significant? No new acquaintances, no situations outside the office where someone might have taken a particular interest? No, think carefully. I have been thinking carefully." I met his gaze. "I'm good at that. It's why you hired me." That almost expression again, something briefly and almost warmly present before it disappeared behind the usual composure. "I know," he said. "That's what concerns me." I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't respond. By the time the 3rd delivery came, a spray of dark red carnations, still no card. People in the office had opinions. I overheard 2 analysts near the coffee station. "Someone's clearly obsessed with her. Maybe it's a client. She handles all his private correspondence." Hargrove looked like he was going to have someone arrested over a peony. "He's protective of all his staff." "It's a liability thing." "It's not a liability thing." I walked past without acknowledging either of them. Camille found me in the elevator at the end of that day. "Okay," she said. "It's not Edmund, right? Because you'd know." "It's not Edmund." "How do you know?" "Because if Edmund wanted to give someone flowers, he would. He doesn't do anonymous. He doesn't do gestures that lack clear purpose. He communicates directly and expects the same in return." Camille studied me with the expression of someone who was not entirely sure I was right, but didn't have the evidence to argue. "He really got under your skin in 2 years, didn't he?" "I understand how he operates." "That's different." "Is it?" The elevator opened on my floor and I stepped out. That night, alone in my apartment in Leslieville, with the dark carnations in a vase I'd bought at Value Village, and a glass of wine I'd been nursing for 40 minutes, I let myself think about what I'd been very carefully not thinking about at work. Edmund Hargrove, who had memorized that I took 1 cream in my coffee without ever asking, who had, exactly once, worked until midnight beside me during a crisis, and ordered food without asking what I wanted and gotten it exactly right, who looked at me sometimes with an expression that I had no professional category for, and which I had spent considerable energy choosing not to examine. Camille was wrong. Nothing was going on between us. But something was. I just didn't know what. And I'd learned, in this job, that the things you don't know are exactly what makes you vulnerable. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hope you enjoyed the flowers. I've been meaning to introduce myself for a while. I think we'd have a lot to talk about. I read it twice. Then I screenshotted it, texted the image to Edmund's private number, and typed, "Just received this. Unknown sender. Possible connection to the deliveries." His response came in 40 seconds, which told me he was awake and had his phone in his hand. "Don't respond. Don't delete. I'll call you in 5 minutes." He called in 3. "Tell me everything you know about your last 3 months. Any events, any encounters outside normal routine. Anyone who showed particular interest in you. Edmund, please." The word came out slightly rough, like it had cost him something. "Audrey, I need to know," I told him. The TIFF volunteer shift in September. The networking event Camille had dragged me to in October. The building's holiday party in December. Nothing that stood out. "The TIFF event," he said. "Who did you speak to?" "A lot of people. I was helping with donor coordination. There was a man named Harrison Collette at that event. Older money, shipping and logistics, on the surface, other things underneath. My firm declined to work with his family 18 months ago after due diligence uncovered some significant concerns." I processed this. "And you think he knows I work for you?" "I think his son does." A pause. "Declan Collette has been making inquiries through our mutual contacts for approximately 2 months, asking about my business structure, my closest associates, my operational vulnerabilities." Edmund's voice was still controlled, but something under it was not. "The flowers started 6 weeks ago, so he's targeting me to get to you. That's my working theory." I was quiet for a moment. "You've been having him watched. I've been protecting this firm. You've been having him watched for 2 months and didn't tell me I was involved." Another pause, longer. "I was hoping to resolve it before it became relevant to you." "I am relevant to me, Edmund. I know that." His voice dropped slightly. "I know. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." It was the first time he'd apologized to me for anything in nearly 2 years. I wasn't sure what to do with that either. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Tonight you lock your doors and check your windows. I'm sending someone from security to your street." He stopped. "And Audrey, check your fire escape access. I'm on the 3rd floor. There isn't one to my unit directly." "Good." The relief in his voice was brief but unmistakable. "I'll explain everything tomorrow. Come in through the parking level. Ask for David at the security desk. He'll be expecting you." I checked my locks, poured the rest of the wine down the sink, and stood in my kitchen looking at the dark carnations for a long moment before putting them in the trash. Whatever this was, I wasn't going to pretend it was a romance. The next morning, Edmund was waiting for me in a conference room, on a floor I'd never had reason to visit, a small, sealed-off space that looked like it existed specifically for conversations that couldn't happen anywhere else. He was standing when I came in, his jacket already off, his sleeves rolled to the forearms, the version of him that only appeared when something was genuinely difficult. On the table was a folder. "Sit down," he said, then caught himself. "Please." I sat. He remained standing, which meant he needed to move through this, and didn't trust himself to stay still. Declan Collette is 31. He runs what's publicly presented as a logistics technology company out of Mississauga, clean on the surface. He came to my attention because his company has been quietly acquiring contracts with mid-size freight operations that my firm has interest in. Edmund pushed the folder toward me. 6 months ago, one of those operations flagged some anomalies in the cargo manifests. I opened the folder. Shipping records, financial summaries, a photograph of a man I didn't recognize, handsome in a calculated way, the kind that read as immediately trustworthy. What kind of anomalies? The kind that suggest his company is facilitating the movement of restricted goods through channels that look entirely legitimate. Edmund sat then, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, and I noticed the shadows under his eyes. When I ended the business relationship with his father, I flagged it to the appropriate regulatory bodies. I didn't take it further because I didn't have enough to be certain. I do now. But Declan doesn't know that. No. He thinks I ended the relationship because I wanted his father's territory. He's been operating on the assumption that I acted out of competitive aggression, not ethics. Edmund's jaw tightened. And now he's trying to get close enough to my operations to find out what I know and who I've told. Through me. You handle my correspondence, my scheduling. You know which meetings I take off calendar, and which contacts I keep separate from our official systems. If someone wanted to understand how this firm actually operates, they'd need me. I closed the folder. So what do you want to do about it? Edmund looked at me steadily. He's going to contact you again. He'll suggest a meeting. Something that feels low stakes. Casual. He's been building up to it with the flowers. You want me to go. I want you to consider it. He leaned back, and I saw the cost of asking this written in the careful way he held himself. With support, wired, with people positioned nearby. You'd be completely safe. You can't guarantee that. No. The honesty surprised me. I can't. Which is why I'm asking, not telling. I thought about what it meant that he was asking. Edmund Hargrove ran a firm worth billions of dollars through a combination of absolute authority and controlled precision. He told people things. He didn't request permission. And if I say no, then I find another way, one that doesn't involve you. His gray eyes held mine. But Audrey, you're already involved. You've been involved since September without knowing it. The only question is whether you know what you're walking into. That was what decided it. Not loyalty, not obligation. The straightforward logic of it. I was in this whether I wanted to be or not. Better to be in it with my eyes open. Tell me everything, I said. All of it. Not the need-to-know version. He told me. It took 90 minutes. He walked me through the history with Harrison Collette, the specifics of what the cargo anomalies suggested, the regulatory bodies that were quietly watching, the reason he hadn't moved faster. He showed me documentation I was certain only 3 or 4 people outside this room had ever seen. He didn't simplify. He didn't soften. When he finished, I asked the question I'd been building toward for an hour. You could handle this without me. You could have someone else make contact, or wait for the regulatory case to build on its own. Why use me? Edmund was quiet for a moment, then. Because Declan is expecting you. Because his approach to you is already established, and switching to a different contact point would alert him. He paused. And because I trust you, more than I trust most people I've worked with for a decade. That's not nothing, in terms of why. That's the professional reason. He met my eyes. Yes. Is there another reason? The silence that followed was the most significant thing he'd said in nearly 2 years of working together. That's a conversation for after, he said finally. After what? After this is resolved. After you're not in a situation where that conversation might look like leverage. He stood, his expression closing back into something I could only read as careful self-containment. If you're willing to do this, David will walk you through the logistics today. We'll set up communication protocols, Edmund. He stopped. The reason you pulled the courier logs the first morning, I said. The reason you came to find me about the peony. Was that operational concern? A long pause. No, he said. It wasn't. He left before I could respond, and I sat in that soundproofed room for another full minute before I trusted myself to stand up. The next 4 days were something I hadn't experienced before, being trained, quietly and efficiently, for a situation I'd never anticipated. David walked me through the communication device, small enough to be undetectable. Edmund's head of private security, a woman named Patricia. No, that name was on the list. A woman named Bridget, who had approximately 3 visible emotions, and expressed all of them with minor variations in posture, showed me how to position myself in public spaces, how to signal without signaling, how to keep a conversation moving along a track that looked natural, but wasn't. Edmund observed most of this with the focused attention he gave everything, and interrupted approximately 4 times per session with additional scenarios. On the 3rd night, he found me alone in the conference room at 9 o'clock, reviewing the documentation we had on Declan Collette's company structure. You don't have to do this. He stood in the doorway. He was still in his full work clothes even at this hour, which I'd long since learned was less about professional image and more about the fact that he found personal transitions, the moment between being at work and not being at work, genuinely difficult. You've said that twice now. I'll keep saying it until it feels less true. I turned from the table to look at him. What feels true about it? He came into the room, stopping a few feet away, and something about the way he held himself then, contained but not controlled, the way you hold something that might spill, made me very quiet. That I brought this to your door, he said. That I managed a situation for months by protecting you without telling you, which wasn't fair, And now I'm asking you to walk into something because it's the cleanest resolution." His jaw tightened. "I don't like it. I'm good at doing things I don't like when they're necessary. This is harder than usual." "Why?" He looked at me with those pale gray eyes, and for a moment I saw past every layer of professional distance he'd built and maintained for 2 years. The precision, the control, the careful management of exactly how much of himself was visible at any given time. "You know why," he said quietly. "Say it anyway." He exhaled slowly. "Because it's you." The words came out deliberately, like he'd decided to be accurate rather than careful. "Because you walk into my office every morning, and the entire shape of the day becomes more manageable. Because you challenge decisions when they're wrong, and you do it without flinching. And I have never, not once, in 15 years of building this firm, had anyone on my team who made me better at my job by simply being good at theirs." He stopped. "Because somewhere in the last year and a half I stopped thinking of you as an exceptional employee and started thinking of you as someone I can't afford to lose. And those are not the same thing, and I know that." I had prepared, in some distant professional part of my mind, for a range of things Edmund Hargrove might eventually say to me. I had not prepared for that. "Edmund, don't." He stepped back, the containment returning. "Don't respond to that right now. Not here, not in the middle of this. After, you keep saying after, because I mean it, after." He looked at me steadily. "Do this, let me keep you safe while you do it, and then we talk. Properly, without the situation making it complicated." I nodded once. Then, because it felt like the truthful thing to do, "I've known something was different for a long time. I just didn't let myself look at it." Something shifted in his expression. Brief, unguarded, real. "I know," he said. "I noticed you not looking. I chose to respect it." We looked at each other across 3 feet of conference room and the entirety of what we hadn't said for almost 2 years. "After," I agreed. Declan Collette texted the following afternoon. He wanted to meet. A wine bar in Yorkville, very public, very casual, just a conversation to introduce himself properly. I texted Edmund before responding. He replied within a minute, "Accept. Saturday 7 p.m. I'll have the bar covered. Bridget will be 2 tables away." Then, after a brief pause, "Are you all right?" I was nervous, which was new. I'd handled difficult situations in this job without getting nervous, but this was different in a way I was still getting used to. "Yes, are you?" A longer pause than usual. "Ask me after." Saturday arrived with the particular gray sky earnestness of a Toronto spring evening. Too cold to call warm, but too bright to call winter. I'd worn my own clothes. Dark jeans, a well-cut blazer, the small communication device clipped into a pendant. Nothing that looked like armor, everything that felt like it. The wine bar was exactly what it presented as. Polished, low-lit, the kind of place where a bottle of Niagara Pinot Noir cost what my monthly transit pass used to. Declan was already there when I arrived, standing the moment I came in, and I understood immediately why Edmund had been cautious. He was easy to look at and easier to talk to, the kind of person who made you feel noticed in a way that felt genuine until you started thinking about why. "Audrey." He reached for my hand briefly. "I'm glad you came." I was worried the approach might have been too unusual. It was definitely direct. I sat across from him. "I'm still not entirely sure how you got my contact information. I have friends who know people." His smile was comfortable, practiced without showing it. "I hope the flowers weren't unwelcome. I tend to overthink gestures. They were beautiful. Though I'm curious why you didn't just introduce yourself at TIFF." Something briefly precise moved across his face, a recalculation, well hidden. "I wasn't ready. I'd seen you from across the room, and then you were gone. I spent a month regretting not saying hello." He leaned forward slightly. "Then I found out who you worked for, and I thought, maybe this could be more than just a chance meeting. More how, you're clearly brilliant at what you do. I run a logistics company, and I'm constantly looking for people who understand operational complexity at a level that most people don't." He paused with the timing of someone who'd practiced pausing. "And Hargrove Capital isn't known for being generous with its people. Someone with your skills could have options." There it was, the angle appearing dressed as a compliment. "Mr. Hargrove is an excellent employer," I said, which was true, and also told him nothing. "I'm sure he is. On paper." Declan's expression became thoughtful. "Though I imagine there are aspects of working that closely with someone, knowing everything that passes through their office. That can become complicated. You must see things that aren't entirely comfortable. Every job has complexity, of course. He tilted his glass slightly. I only mean that if you ever felt that complexity was more than you'd bargained for, there are people who would make it worth your while to be forthcoming about it. I let the silence sit for a moment. Not too long, just long enough to seem like I was considering. That's an interesting thing to say to someone you've known for 20 minutes, I said carefully. I'm direct. He smiled. I thought you'd appreciate that. I do appreciate directness. I picked up my glass, which is why I'll be direct back. Are you asking me to share confidential information about my employer in exchange for compensation? His expression shifted, a micro-adjustment, a rapid internal reprocessing. I'm asking if you'd be open to a professional conversation about your future options, he said smoothly. With someone who has a business history that didn't end well with the firm I work for. The mask held, but barely. You know about that. I know quite a bit, I said. That's also what you pay me for. Well, not you. But the principle stands. We looked at each other across the table, and I watched him arrive at the conclusion that this conversation hadn't gone the way he'd planned. I think, he said finally, that I may have misread the situation. I think you may have. I set down my glass and stood. I appreciate the wine. The flowers were genuinely lovely. And I'd suggest that whatever you're looking for, this isn't how you find it. I left without looking back. In the back of the waiting car, I pressed my hand flat against my knee to stop it from shaking, not from fear, from the particular adrenaline of having done something very precisely, and not knowing yet if it had worked. My earpiece crackled quietly. Edmund's voice, you were perfect. Everything captured. I exhaled. 2 weeks later, the regulatory case that had been building for 8 months came to a head. Declan Collette's company was suspended from operations pending investigation. His father, in Naples on a supposed vacation, was interviewed by the CBSA. The particular freight contracts that had raised flags were flagged formally. Edmund told me over the phone on a Thursday morning, his voice carrying the particular flatness of exhausted relief. It's done, he said. It's done, I agreed. Are you at work? It's 8:45. Yes, I'm not in today. A pause unusual. Edmund was never not in. I'll be in tomorrow, can you? He stopped. Could you come here instead? I have something I need to say, and I'd rather not do it in the office. I'd been to Edmund's house exactly once, to drop off documents during a power outage that had taken out the building's server room. It was in Moore Park, tall and narrow and pale brick, with a garden that looked deliberately uncurated. When I arrived at 10, he opened the door himself, which somehow surprised me more than anything else about the morning. He was in a dark sweater and jeans. I'd never seen him in jeans. It did something to the careful distance I'd maintained between us that I chose not to examine too closely yet. Come in, he said. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. Original tile counters, a window full of light, a bookshelf along one wall that was 3/4 full of philosophy and 1/4 full of novels. I stood in the middle of it feeling like I was seeing something I wasn't quite supposed to see yet. Tea? He asked. Please. He made it without asking how I took it, because he already knew. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island with our mugs and the fact of everything between us, and I waited because he'd asked me here, and this was his move to make. I handled this badly, he said. The situation with the Colettes. I knew for months that it was close to you, and I managed it in a way that kept you out of it, which I told myself was protecting you, and which was also convenient. It meant I didn't have to have a conversation I wasn't sure how to have. About what? He looked at me. About the fact that somewhere in the last year and a half, the lines I maintained between professional and everything else became significantly harder to maintain. Edmund, I'm not finished. Not sharp. The way he said it when he needed to finish a thought before he lost the nerve. I've built this firm on the premise that I operate better alone, that the people in my life at a professional level stay at a professional level, because proximity to me creates risk, and I'm not someone who does this easily. Or well, you're doing fine so far. Something briefly and unexpectedly warm crossed his face. I lost my composure over a flower on your desk, he said. I had courier logs pulled because someone sent you a peony. I've been running threat assessments on a man who was, as far as anyone could see, simply interested in you. And the fact that I found that genuinely intolerable had nothing to do with operational security. I set my mug down. Are you telling me you were jealous? He was quiet for a moment. I was. He stopped. Tried again. Yes, I was jealous. Which is not a thing I say easily, and which I'm aware reflects a significant departure from how I've conducted myself for nearly 2 years. Nearly 2 years of being exceptionally professional. The ghost of something wry. Yes, Edmund, I said quietly. I'm going to say something, and I need you to just let me finish it. He nodded. I am very good at my job. I am good at it in part because I pay attention, and I have been paying attention to you for the better part of 2 years. I know how you take your coffee, and when you're running numbers in your head, and what it means when you answer the phone with your last name versus your first, and when you've slept less than 5 hours. I looked at him steadily, and I know that somewhere around month 6, I stopped thinking of you as a difficult employer, and started thinking of you as someone I wanted to know, outside the context of Hargrove Capital, and I put that in a drawer because it was inconvenient and slightly terrifying, and because you gave absolutely no indication. I gave you lunch orders and unsolicited compliments and very transparent jealousy over a plant, he said. I was being professional. So was I. A pause. Very badly, apparently. We looked at each other across the kitchen island, and all of it, the 2 years, the careful distance, the things we'd both put in drawers, settled somewhere specific between us. I walked around his side of the island. He went very still in the way of someone who has prepared themselves for several outcomes, and is not certain which one is arriving. I reached up and kissed him, because I had been thinking about it for approximately 14 months, and because someone had to. For 1 second, he didn't move. Then his hand came up to the back of my head, and he kissed me back with the focused, deliberate attention he gave to everything that mattered. When we pulled apart, we were both quiet for a moment. That was, he said carefully, not what I expected. I know. I'm good at anticipating what people need before they know they need it. A real laugh, brief, genuine, a sound I'd heard maybe 4 times in 2 years, and found each time slightly startling, the way something rare always is. He pressed his forehead against mine. This is going to be complicated, he said. Everything about you is complicated. I'm still here. There are things you should know. The firm isn't clean in ways that are entirely comfortable. There are decisions I've made over the years, compromises the industry requires, associations that exist, because this world doesn't run on good intentions alone. His voice was quiet, honest in a way I hadn't heard before. I'm not a simple person to be in proximity to. There will be moments you find that difficult. Tell me one. He did. It took 20 minutes. A business decision from 4 years ago that had consequences he hadn't fully anticipated. A choice between 2 bad options where he'd chosen the one that protected his people and cost someone else. He didn't minimize it. When he finished, I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. You could have hidden that, I said. You asked. Most people wouldn't have answered. Most people aren't asking you to be in their life. That requires honesty I find uncomfortable but not negotiable. I picked up my mug again. What happens now? With the regulatory case with Declan? It proceeds without us. The investigators have what they need. The Collette family has enough to manage without adding us to their concerns. His expression became measured, considering. What happens with you and I? That's a different question, and one that involves some changes to how the firm operates. I can't keep you as my direct assistant if this is what it is. Professionally and ethically, that matters to me. I know I'd like to offer you a different role, strategic operations. It's less structured, more autonomous. You'd be building systems rather than maintaining them. Better compensation. A different kind of indispensability. He looked at me carefully. That's not contingent on anything personal. That offer was coming anyway. I want to be clear about that. I know that too. I held his gaze. When did you decide to offer it? February. 6 months ago, before the flowers, before any of this. I thought about that. About Edmund Hargrove, who had been rearranging things for months without saying why, because he'd looked at me and seen something worth protecting, even before he'd admitted to himself what that meant. Yes, I said. To the role. And the other part. I looked at him, in his kitchen in his jeans, with his tea and his philosophy books and the garden that grew the way it wanted. The version of him that existed outside of the 32nd floor, which turned out to be entirely himself. The other part was already yes, I said. I just needed you to ask. He took my hand then, with a careful deliberateness that meant something specific from him. Not impulse, but decision, which from Edmund was the more significant thing. I should have asked sooner, he said. You asked when you were ready. That's enough. 6 months later, I stood in his kitchen again, except that it was ours now in every way that mattered. My books on the second shelf, my spare jacket on the hook by the door, my coffee mug in the cupboard beside his. The regulatory case had closed. The Collette family had relocated their operations, making decisions that were no longer our concern. The firm had moved forward, so had we. It wasn't simple. He'd been right about that. There were moments that required more from me than I'd expected. Decisions he made that I challenged, and moments I understood his world more clearly than was always comfortable. There were nights when the weight of what he carried was visible in ways he was still learning to let me see. And mornings when I had to remind both of us that choosing something difficult wasn't the same as choosing something wrong. But there were also mornings like this one. The city light coming through the kitchen window, the particular smell of decent coffee, Edmund standing beside me, reading something on his tablet with his shoulder pressed against mine, and the very ordinary, very extraordinary fact of having chosen each other with full information and no illusions. He looked up and caught me looking. What? He said. Nothing. I turned back to my coffee. Just counting. He was quiet for a moment. Counting what? The good ones. I smiled at the window. The days where it's just this. He set down the tablet, reached over briefly, and covered my hand with his. I didn't need to look at him to know what his face was doing. I already knew.